Imagine a child's body, once vibrant with an impossible, otherworldly green, now fading to a pale, sickly pallor. This was the fate of the boy from Woolpit. He appeared from nowhere, speaking a language no one knew, his skin the color of fresh spring leaves. For months, he and his sister were a local spectacle, a miracle, or a curse. But while his sister slowly shed her alien hue, adapting to the food and customs of 12th century England, the boy withered. He refused all nourishment but the raw green beans he was found with, and his spirit seemed to drain away with his color. He died within a year, a green enigma dissolving into a common tragedy. But his death wasn't the end of the mystery. It was only the beginning of a story far more disturbing than a simple visit from another world. And now please stop the video and subscribe to our channel. To be able to keep making videos like this, we need to reach 1,000 subscribers as soon as possible. Thank you. To understand how that boy ended up wasting away, his impossible color fading to a deathly pale, we have to go back to the beginning. We have to travel to the heart of 12th century England, to a small village in Suffolk called Woolpit. This wasn't a peaceful time. It was the reign of King Stephen, a dark period historians now call the Anarchy, where law was a rumor and survival was a daily struggle. The very name of the village, Woolpit, comes from the strange ancient excavations that dotted the landscape, deep trenches dug centuries before, rumored to be traps for the last wolves of England, and places superstitious locals avoided after sundown. Imagine you're a reaper in the fields on a hot harvest day, the air thick with the smell of cut wheat and sweat. Suddenly, a sound cuts through the afternoon haze. It's a cry, but it's thin and strange. A wailing that doesn't sound entirely human. You and the other villagers follow the sound to the edge of one of those dark wolf pits, and from the shadows, two small figures climb out. It's a boy and a girl, but you stop dead in your tracks, your blood running cold. Their skin, every inch of it, is the vibrant, shocking green of new leaves. This isn't paint, it's their flesh. They are terrified, chattering at each other in a frantic, guttural language none of you have ever heard. Now, this isn't just some ghost story whispered in a pub. This event was meticulously documented by two of the most respected chroniclers of the age, men whose job was to record the history of England. William of Newburgh wrote of it in his Historia Rerum Anglicarum, and Ralph of Coggeshall recorded the testimony of the man who took the children in. These are the official case files, the primary sources for an event that defies all logic. The villagers had found something impossible. But what they didn't know was that the real horror wasn't the color of the children's skin. The real horror was in the story they would eventually tell, a story of a home in a land of perpetual twilight, and how they came to be in our world. It took months of patient work at the home of the knight, Sir Richard de Calne. But eventually, the terror in the girl's eyes began to fade. She started eating normal food, and with it, her otherworldly green color began to recede, revealing the complexion of a human child. And then, she began to speak. She learned their language, and finally, she could answer the question that burned in everyone's mind. Where did you come from? Her answer was not what anyone expected. She claimed they came from a place called St. Martin's Land. It was a Christian place with churches, but it was a world utterly alien to ours. There was no sun there, no blue sky, no bright daylight. She described a world of perpetual twilight, where the light was dim and constant, like the world just after sunset. Can you imagine it? A whole country, a whole people, living their lives in a world without a Sunday. She said they were herding their father's flocks in a field one day, when they heard a sudden, tremendous sound. She described it as a loud, chaotic ringing, like all the church bells of a great cathedral ringing at once. The noise was deafening, disorienting. In the confusion, they followed the sound into a cavern, and then nothing. The next thing they knew, they were lying at the bottom of the wolf pit in Woolpit, blinded by a brilliant light they had never seen before, our sun, and gasping in the thick, hot air. So, what was this place? A hidden kingdom deep within the earth? Another dimension that had momentarily brushed against our own? Her story sounded like a mad fairy tale, the confused ramblings of a traumatized child. But if you were tempted to dismiss it, you were always brought back to the cold, hard facts. You were brought back to the undeniable, impossible evidence that confronted the villagers from the very first day. How do you explain the green skin? And how do you explain their absolute refusal of all food? Except for one very strange thing, her story of a sunless world sounded impossible, a fantasy born from shock. But the moment you started to dismiss it, you were confronted by the cold, hard, physical evidence. And it began with the skin. The chronicles are clear. This was not a slight, sickly tint. William of Newburgh described their entire bodies as being tinged with a deep green color, viridis, that distinguished them from all other mortals. Then there were the clothes, a crucial piece of forensic evidence recorded by Ralph of Coggeshall that is so often forgotten. He wrote that they were dressed in garments of a strange color, made from an unknown material. Think about that. It wasn't just their biology that was alien. Their technology, their very fabric, was unrecognizable to the people of 12th century England. But the most disturbing piece of evidence was their diet. The villagers, taking pity on the starving children, offered them bread, roasted meats, all the food of their world. The children refused it all. They would have starved to death, weeping from hunger, rather than touch the food we eat. Then, the villagers brought in freshly harvested beans from the fields. The children's eyes lit up. They frantically gestured at the raw vegetables, and when they were given them, they tore them open at the stalk, not the pod, and devoured the contents with a desperate, animalistic hunger. Picture this. 2 children, green as jade, gaunt from starvation, refusing a warm loaf of bread but throwing themselves onto a pile of raw beans, eating them stalk and all. What does that tell you? To the villagers, this was all just more proof of their otherworldly nature. Green skin, strange clothes, a diet that seemed utterly alien. It was a perfect, terrifying, supernatural puzzle. They had no way of knowing that these 3 clues, when pieced together with the bloody, hidden history of their own time, pointed not to another world, but to a very human horror unfolding just miles from their own homes. To find the truth behind this mystery, we don't need to look to another world. We need to look closer at the world the children were found in, a brutal, violent landscape tearing itself apart. The official story places their discovery during the reign of King Stephen, a period known to historians by a single, terrifying name: the Anarchy. For nearly 20 years, England was ravaged by a bitter civil war. Castles were burned, villages were pillaged, and the rule of law completely collapsed. The Anglo-Saxon Chronicle described it as 19 long winters when God and his angels slept. In this chaos, whole populations were displaced and famine was rampant. And in times of fear and starvation, people always look for someone to blame. In eastern England, that blame often fell on the outsiders, the Flemish immigrants. They had been encouraged to settle in England for generations, valued for their expert weaving skills, but many also served as mercenaries, and their distinct language and customs made them a constant target of suspicion. They were the perennial outsiders. And when the violence of the anarchy erupted, they were caught in the crossfire, persecuted and driven from their homes. But the worst was yet to come. Just a few years later, in 1173, a massive army of Flemish mercenaries and their families landed in Suffolk to challenge the throne of King Henry II. They were met by an English army near the village of Fornham Street Martin, a name you should remember. The battle was a slaughter. Thousands of Flemish were cut down, hunted through the fields and forests by local levies. It was a vicious, bloody affair, a local massacre that became a buried historical trauma, a brutal slaughter of foreign people in a place called Street Martin, just a day's walk from Woolpit. Suddenly, a child's fairy tale about Street Martin's land starts to sound chillingly like a survivor's testimony. All the pieces were there: the strange language, the displacement, the trauma. But one question remained, the most impossible one of all. How could a human tragedy, no matter how horrific, physically turn a child's skin green? The answer to that question, how a human tragedy could turn a child's skin green, isn't found in folklore or fantasy. It's found in medical science, in a condition that was once terrifyingly common. Modern historians and medical experts believe the children were suffering from a severe case of hypochromic anemia, known historically by a much more evocative name, chlorosis, or the green sickness. This isn't a supernatural transformation. It's a horrifyingly physical one. Your blood is red because of the iron in your hemoglobin, which carries oxygen through your body. When you starve, your body is deprived of iron. It can no longer produce enough healthy red blood cells. Your blood literally thins and pales. When that pale, oxygen-poor blood flows beneath skin that is itself translucent from malnutrition, the visual effect is shocking. The natural yellow pigments of the skin combine with the bluish tint of the deoxygenated blood, creating a distinct, unnatural, greenish pallor. The color wasn't a mark of an alien species. It was the physical symptom of a body shutting down from extreme starvation. And once you understand that, everything else clicks into place. The chronicles state that as the girl ate a normal, iron-rich diet, her green color gradually faded away. That wasn't magic leaving her body. It was her body healing, finally able to produce the red blood cells she needed to live. And the boy, the one described as weaker and more listless, he was likely too far gone. His small body, ravaged by a more advanced stage of the anemia, simply gave out. His death wasn't a failure to adapt to our world. It was the tragic, inevitable outcome of human starvation. The green color wasn't the mark of another race. It was the color of a child dying. And with that horrifying realization, all the other pieces of the puzzle begin to snap into place, revealing a truth not of another world, but of the darkest corners of our own. The medical evidence tells us the children were starving. The historical records tell us of a brutal massacre of foreign-speaking people that happened at a village called Fornham Street Martin. When you place these two truths side by side, the entire mystery unravels in an instant of horrifying clarity. The girl's testimony wasn't a fairy tale. It was a fragmented memory of an unspeakable trauma. She said they came from Street Martin's land. This wasn't another dimension. It was her home. The village of Fornham Street Martin, the very site of the slaughter. The unknown language they spoke, the one that sounded so alien to the Suffolk villagers, it was Flemish. And the most fantastical detail of all, the land of perpetual twilight with no sun? That wasn't an underworld. It was a child's description of hiding for days, maybe weeks, deep inside the ancient and dense Thetford forest. Imagine two small, terrified children fleeing a massacre. Their parents likely cut down before their eyes. They run into the woods under a canopy of leaves so thick that it blots out the sky, plunging their world into a dim, green, permanent twilight. The loud, bell-like sound that transported them could have been the distant church bells of Bury Street, Edmonds. A sound they followed out of the darkness, delirious from hunger. Stumbling out of the forest into the bright open fields of Woolpit would have felt like a violent, instantaneous transportation to another world. The truth is sickeningly simple. The children weren't aliens. They were orphans. They weren't visitors from another world. They were refugees, the last survivors of an ethnic cleansing. And their green skin, the ultimate symbol of their otherness, was nothing more than the physical manifestation of their suffering, a living testament to the horror they had endured. The mystery of who the Green Children were is solved. But a more haunting question remains. What becomes of a child who survives such a nightmare? What scars did the girl carry with her long after her green skin had finally faded away? The physical mystery was over, but the human tragedy continued. Quietly, for the rest of a lifetime, the boy was gone, a casualty of the horror he'd endured. But his sister survived. The records tell us she was baptized, given a proper Christian name, Agnes's, and was assimilated into the household of Richard de Calne. She eventually married a man from King's Lynn. On the surface, it's a story of a successful rescue. a strange life given a normal ending. But one of the chroniclers, William of Newburgh, leaves us with a final, disturbing detail about her adult life. He notes that she was known for being rather wanton and impudent. In the rigidly structured world of 12th century England, those weren't casual words. They implied a woman who was wild, who disregarded social rules, who was perhaps promiscuous and defiant. For centuries, this was seen as just a strange footnote, a quirky personality trait of the alien girl. But look at it through the lens of trauma. Look at it not as a moral failing, but as a scar. Modern psychology recognizes this kind of reckless, defiant behavior as a classic symptom of severe childhood PTSD. A child who has seen their world destroyed, their parents murdered, and who has starved to the brink of death doesn't just get better. They are permanently altered. Her otherness never truly left her. It simply changed form. It morphed from the impossible color of her skin into the unacceptable shape of her behavior. The green faded, but the trauma remained, a defiant ghost inside her. She survived, but the girl from Street Martin's land was lost forever, a ghost haunting a new life. Her story forces us to ask one final, uncomfortable question. Why did the people of her time, and why do we prefer the story of green-skinned aliens to the devastating truth of human cruelty? That question, why the fairy tale was created and why it persists, is perhaps the most unsettling part of this entire story. Because the answer says more about us than it does about two lost children. Why would a community choose to believe in a fantastical story of visitors from a twilight world instead of confronting a human tragedy on their doorstep? One possibility is rooted in guilt and complicity. The persecution of the Flemish wasn't a secret. The massacre at Fornham Street Martin was a major local event. Is it really plausible that the villagers of Woolpit were completely ignorant? Or was it simply easier to believe that two green-skinned children fell out of a parallel universe than it was to acknowledge they crawled out of the bloody aftermath of a local atrocity? A fairy tale requires nothing from you but wonder. A human tragedy demands a response, justice, compassion, or at the very least, a heavy conscience. The myth of the alien children conveniently absolved them of all responsibility. But there is another, perhaps more charitable explanation. Simple, profound incomprehension. The children's story, filtered through the lens of extreme trauma, would have been fragmented, dreamlike, and nonsensical. Faced with an account they couldn't piece together, from children whose very appearance defied nature, the villagers may have filled in the gaps with the only tools they had: folklore and superstition. Perhaps they weren't covering up a crime, but were genuinely trying to make sense of the incomprehensible. But whether it was born from guilt or from confusion, the result is the same. A comfortable myth was manufactured to replace a disturbing truth. We do this all the time. We invent monsters to avoid confronting the monstrosity of our own actions. The legend of the Green Children has endured for nearly 1,000 years. Not because it's a good story about aliens, but because it's a perfect story about us. It holds up a mirror, showing us how we build comforting lies to hide from terrible truths. And the reflection it shows is one we can still see today. The story of the Green Children is a mirror, and it has been showing us the same reflection for over 800 years. The faces change, the centuries turn, but the image remains the same. This has never really been a story about aliens or a magical world. It has always been a timeless and deeply human allegory for how we treat the outsider, the refugee, the victim of a trauma so profound that their story sounds like a language we cannot comprehend. We are still surrounded by people whose experiences are alien to our own, whose suffering is so deep it can feel like they come from another world. The green color of the children was a physical brand of their suffering, an undeniable external mark of the horror they had endured. But what did the world do with that mark? It erased it. The girl was made normal. She was fed, clothed, baptized, and her skin faded back to a familiar tone. In saving the child, they scrubbed away the evidence of the crime, washing away her true story and replacing it with a more palatable, more magical fantasy. The myth survived because it was easier than the truth. And so we are left with one final, haunting thought. Look away from the distant past and look around you now. How many true stories of suffering do we overlook every day, simply because we prefer a more convenient fiction? Who are the green children of our time?